But today, I want to talk to you about a very timely question, and that is, what kind of world do we want to build together? Not what kind of world do we want to live in, as if it's all been prepared for us, but what we are called to do together. If you're thinking that spirituality isn't about the world, or if you're thinking this sounds too much like politics, remember that all great spiritual traditions have always asked this question. Jesus called it the kingdom of God. Inspired by Jesus, Gandhi called it the uplift of all. Quakers have what are called testimonies that lead to the goal of a peaceful and spirit-led society. Martin Luther King called it the beloved community, and so on. The heart of these teachings isn't to use spiritual truth to withdraw from society. It's to build a better one. Many people don't know this, but A Course in Miracles has its own vision for the world it wants us to build. It does. The Course lays out a magnificent picture of how we can save the world. That's the exact language that it uses, by healing our mind with love and then extending that healing outward until love covers all that is. It sounds good, but naturally, our next question is, how can we actually do that? As is typically the case, the Course doesn't give us some four-step, neat and tidy formula for saving the world, which is why I've based my message on what is probably my all-time favorite of the hundreds of articles that Robert has written. It's called The Social Vision of A Course in Miracles, as he mentioned in the introduction, and you can find it on the library of our website at circleofaid.org. We've also recorded a podcast on this in the past that's available on YouTube as well. But what makes this article so interesting and why we keep coming back to it again and again here at the Circle is that while you probably know that A Course in Miracles is full of imagery, you're reading and you come across images of deserts and gardens and altars and temples and treasure houses, etc. When you look at this imagery across multiple passages, a shared picture emerges. What you see is a transformation that begins in a single mind or a pair of minds that are joined in holy relationship, that spreads to other people and ultimately touches the entire world. So in other words, in the article, what Robert noticed is that when you take the Course's imagery passages and you layer them one on top of the other, you don't see a bunch of different random images. What you see is a single unfolding blueprint for the healing of our world. And so what I'd like to do today is to give you a 30,000-foot overview of what we have come to call here the social vision of A Course in Miracles. And then I want to walk you through each of the steps one by one. So the social vision all begins with the barrenness of the ego's world, which the Course frequently portrays as a desert. Then one person enters into a holy instant, or two people enter into a holy relationship. When that happens, they form a garden in the desert where God's love touches down on this earth and life springs up around them. And then there's the feast. This is what Albin was just singing about in his song, where what began as the healing of one mind or two minds is now extended to everyone. All are welcome to join in. That's why the song started with the line, "Welcome in." And this is how the garden of God's love grows out into the world. So that's the big picture. And I want to tell you about each of the elements, starting with the desert. We all know what a desert is like. In language that is new to the CE, the Course spells it out. It says a desert is a desert is a desert. You can do anything you want in it, but you cannot change it from what it is. It still lacks water, which is why it is a desert. Now, the course uses desert imagery not only to describe the outer conditions of our world, but also the inner content of our world as well. The idea is that what makes a desert is the absence of water. And here in our world and in our mind, there's an absence of love. That's what makes our mind and that's what makes our world a desert. It's worse than that, though, because in addition to having a lack of love, we also have in our mind the blazing presence of hate, like a hot sun that is scorching everything we see in our world. Chapter 18 of the text says, "Look at the desert, dry and unproductive, scorched and joyless, that makes up your little kingdom." Now, the course paints us as isolated individuals wandering alone through the desert, through the dust, lost, weary, starving, searching in vain for water we cannot find, without love, without joy, without direction, and without companionship. And it feels like that here sometimes. It is obviously a sad and it's a lonely picture. And from a course perspective, the only thing that got us there is our hate and our anger. Now, we don't like to talk about hate. We have so many ways to defend why we're angry. We think we're angry because of the state of the world, because of the people in our lives who have hurt us. We're mad about all the war and all the violence. We're mad about the criminals on the street. In the course, we're not asked to ignore those things. But also in the course, none of those things is the actual problem. Our hate is the problem. That's the thing to address. And as a way of explaining this, and at the risk of giving you entirely too much information, I will share with you that for the past 6 years, I have been dealing with a health challenge in the form of I keep getting flares of this bacteria called Klebsiella. And for the first few years, I was going to doctor after doctor, and everyone was treating it like a series of different infections. Like I had gotten one infection that would go away with a round of antibiotics, and then another one would pop up again. And then finally, I went to a specialist who figured out what was going on. And he said, the problem isn't that you keep having these new infections. The problem is that you have one old infection that never went away. Now, if you're lucky and you've never had to deal with any of this, you may not know that bacteria is incredibly clever. It can hide on purpose in your body by embedding itself into tissue. It can cover itself with a protective biofilm to evade the body's immune system. It reproduces like crazy. And amazingly, it can even go dormant when you're taking medication so that the medication doesn't reach it. Bacteria has all of these truly impressive ways to do an end run around whatever it is that's trying to kill it. And the same thing is true with our hate. It is very easy to look around at the extreme rhetoric and the violence that shows up in our feeds every single day and think that things have gotten so bad. That's what we say, right? Things have gotten so toxic. But this hostility is not new. This is the same old hate that has been with us forever. Like bacteria, hate is a survivor. It disguises itself. It hides itself. It goes dormant for a while and then pops back up. It produces like crazy. And lo and behold, it comes back all the time. So we shouldn't be looking at the anger of this time as a new condition in us caused by what's happening now. It is the one very old infection of hate. We can collectively contain the human ego, which the Course says is suspicious at best and vicious at worst, by making rules for civil society and making laws to enforce them. But we cannot legislate our way into changing people's hearts. The rules and the laws, they need to be there. But as we're learning, until and unless we start healing our heart, the hate will just keep shape shifting and our world will remain a desert. All is not lost, though, because the Course says God's love enters the desert when one person chooses a holy instant, meaning a time where they love purely without attack. And God's love enters the world where two people enter into a holy relationship, meaning they join in a common goal that transcends the ego. Either way, whether it's one person or two, when you call on love to enter, this is what causes a garden to grow in the desert and a zone of love springs up in what the ego made desolate. Again and again, the Course gives us beautiful, like knee-buckling images of life springing up where before there was just barren ground. And I want to read you a few passages on this so you see what I'm talking about. In chapter 18 of the text, there's a section called The Little Garden. And that section says, "See how life springs up everywhere. The desert becomes a garden, green and deep and quiet." In the What is a Miracle section of the workbook, the Course says miracles, which are expressions of love, as we know, fall like drops of healing rain from heaven on a dry and dusty world where starved and thirsty creatures come to die. Now they have water. Now the world is green, and everywhere the signs of life spring up. And near the end of the text, in a section called For They Have Come, the Course is talking about two people letting go of the shadow that they have held between each other. And this is what invites the presence of God and Christ, our true self, to enter and join them. And in that section, it says, because of them, meaning God and Christ, have miracles sprung up as grass and flowers on the barren ground, which hate had scorched and rendered desolate. What hate had wrought, have they undone. My wedding ring, I don't know if you can see this, but my wedding ring is based on this little garden image in A Course in Miracles. Robert and I are not perfect by any stretch, but one of the goals in our marriage always is to be the place of love and safety where the other can rest and heal. And for us, what that means is to have a relationship that is purely kind, where the love at the center is what's most important. The love is the thing to protect versus either one of our individual egos. And this idea means so much to us that at the end of our wedding ceremony, just before the officiant said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," she read the very last line from the little garden section that says, "And walk into the garden love has prepared for both of you." Meaning, walk from this aisle into your new life that you have just vowed to make a garden of love. And sometimes I'll even look at my ring and I'll think, am I being a desert or am I being a garden right now? So this idea takes on so much more significance when you realize that in the Course, a garden is so much more than just a garden. It's holy ground. The Course in the little garden section talks about the garden as a holy place. And in the section For They Have Come, it says the greenery in your garden becomes, quote, a living temple in a world of light. A living temple in a world of light. So think about that idea for a moment. Think about what it means to walk into a temple or walk into a space like a cathedral. There's a sacredness to it. There's a reverence. You know it's holy, so you're careful about what you do. And everyone else knows it too. You don't see people running around, yelling at each other, cussing at each other in these holy spaces. There's just a collective recognition that there's something different about this space. Now, contrast that to how you feel when you're pulling up to the dumpster, as I've learned they call the tip here in England. Do we treat our relationships like we have just entered into a sacred temple? Or do we treat them like we've just entered the dumpster to drop off our trash? Earlier, when I read from that section for They Have Come, I mentioned that it's talking about two people who decide to forgive, and that's what invites the presence of God and Christ to come in and join them. So, in other words, we can personally invite God to enter our mind and enter our world, and that's certainly a good thing to do. But the real thing to focus on here is that forgiveness itself is the invitation. That is what actually allows God to enter your mind. And God entering your mind is what makes the space around you holy ground. Because after all, God is there. And the Course goes wild when this happens, like a wedding at the end of a Disney movie. Jesus depicts this not only with temples, like the moment that you, through your love and forgiveness, allow God to enter your mind. He depicts it with temples, with holy altars springing up, towering over the world, angels joining in. And he even says, the lights of heaven come to sing to you. We take that seriously. It is quite the celebration. And in fact, we can assume that this is what happened with Helen Schuckman and Bill Thetford when they joined. They didn't know that the light of heaven was singing to them when they agreed to find a better way for the psychology department where they work to get along. But their joining in love and forgiveness did become an anchor point in which God came into their lives and through which God came into the world. That's the call, and that's the model for all of us, to be those anchor points through which God can do his healing work here. The Course says that when we do this, when we move from a desert to holy ground in our mind, it is literally a patch of heaven on earth. Literally a patch of heaven on earth. That's pretty cool. So then comes the next phase, because your garden isn't meant to heal just you or heal you and your holy relationship partner alone. Your love is meant to be the place where everyone can come and be healed. In the little garden section of the text, Jesus says, give them a place of refuge, prepared by love for them where once a desert was. So here you see the desert image again. Again, you have not been the only one wandering alone through the desert in a world scorched with hate. There are many who need refuge, and there are many who need to find a pocket of heaven on earth. Your job is to welcome them. And the Course talks about this in two ways. It talks about you going out to them, and it talks about them coming to you. In the Circle of Atonement section, for example, you actively welcome all what the section calls tortured minds into the safe embrace of love and union, telling them that they're guiltless and so they belong there. They belong with you in the circle of atonement. And then in the little garden section, you actively go out and find the desert wanderers and lead them gently into your quiet garden to receive their blessing there. In both cases, the blessing that they receive is welcome. They discover that they are no longer that starved and thirsty creature, but they are an honored guest in your love. Honored guest is more language you heard in Albin's song. The course has a lot of imagery around this idea as well. It often refers to the open door, another thing you heard in Albin's song. The course talks about the hearth of mercy, where nothing is asked of anyone except the gift of accepting their welcome. Think about that. That the only thing that you ask from your honored guest is the gift that they accept your welcome. And then once they come in, Jesus speaks twice about a joyous feast that you share with them. And I want to read you some quotes about the feast. In the first, which we call the Feast of Plenty, the course calls it the Feast of Plenty too. The course says the door is open, that all those may come who would no longer starve and would enjoy the feast of plenty set before them there. And they will meet with your invited guests. Again, that's God and Christ. The miracle has asked to come to you. So in other words, God and Christ have come to the table because you invited them with your love. The miracle of your love asked them to come to you. Others who have been starving out in the desert of the world come too, and there everyone enjoys the feast of plenty together. Imagine a feast with those guests. The section goes on to say that love has set the table, it's a beautiful phrase, in the space that seemed to keep God apart from you. It also says that unlike our feasts in this world, the feast of plenty never ends. The other image of the feast is actually set within a quiet garden. This is a remarkable passage that talks about a feast that honors your holy relationship. And notice in this passage, Jesus joins you in the feast of love, which is similar to God and Christ being the guests at the Feast of Plenty. I know this passage is a little long, but it's so pretty, so I want to read the whole thing to you. It says, love too would set a feast before you on a table covered with a spotless cloth, set in a quiet garden where no sound but singing and a softly joyous whispering is ever heard. This is the feast which honors your holy relationship and at which everyone is welcome as an honored guest. And in a holy instant, grace is said by everyone together as they join in gentleness before the table of communion. And I will join you there, as long ago I promised and promise still. For in your new relationship am I made welcome, and where I am made welcome, there I am. We think of feasts as being celebrations we hold with people we love. And certainly the feast that is honoring your holy relationship, you'd think would be a table for two. But here, the feast is for everyone. The Course literally says, cast no one out, but join him in the holy place of peace, which is for all of us, united as one within the cause of peace. And I find this to be so interesting because essentially what we're talking about in this message is how to save the world. And this is such a different way of thinking about that idea. We tend to think of saving the world in terms of human activism and human organizing. You know, we get together, we sign petitions, we schedule marches, we go to the polls, we put pressure on those in power, and that's how the world changes. Those are all great things. We should keep doing them, but that's not the process that Jesus is talking about in the Course for saving the world. In his mind, real change happens when one or two people allow divine love to touch down on earth, which makes the space around them holy, and then extend from there until everything and everyone is touched by God. And again, the perfect example of this pattern is the Course itself. Helen and Bill joined in pursuit of a better way to get along. And then out of the blue, Jesus steps in and the Course comes through. But it doesn't stop with them. The book gets published, and then groups start to form, and teachers arise. Organizations and centers spring up around the Course. More books are published. And all of that is just the beginning. The Course is ultimately meant to become a true helper of the world. And because of that, we're talking millions and millions of people. But it all started with two people who chose the garden over the desert. Robert was reminding me earlier of a story from Ken Wapnick, where he told in his book, Absence from Felicity, where Helen was stressing about a report that she was working on. And Jesus said to her, "This is not what you will leave behind you." So think about that. Here, Helen and Bill are doing their best that they know to do to save the world by bringing about a better understanding of human psychology. And Jesus is saying, no, that's not your real legacy. That's not your real contribution. It is such a telling example of how we think we're helping the world versus how God sees it. So I hope that you can see just how serious the Course is about the process of how we truly change things here. I'll give you a quick recap. So by choosing love yourself, or by entering into a holy relationship, you become an anchor point for God on earth. And because of that, inevitably, people will be drawn to the quiet garden of your love, or you go out to find them, leading them back to where they are offered welcome and blessing. In your love, they rest and they heal. In your love, they join with the holiness of God. In your love, they join with another, and together the two of them carry the garden forward. And through their love, the holy garden spreads across the desert of the world, and heaven comes to the entire earth at last. Remarkable picture. So now that you know the picture, how can you live into the Course's social vision? Well, for starters, you can commit to making your mind a home for God versus hostage to the ego. Love is always asking for new anchor points from which to light up the world. You can also start by seeing every encounter you have with other people as holy. You can enter into each interaction as if you were entering that sacred temple versus as if you were entering that dumpster. And this, by the way, is why we have complete courtesy as the guiding principle of our online community here at the Circle. This is our version of holy ground and the feast where everyone is welcome. And finally, you can commit to making your love the quiet garden where other people feel safe to plant their life. I think it was Marcus Borg who talked about Jesus having what he called a zone of liberation around him, where everyone who came in contact with Jesus felt like they were healed, forgiven, and free. We can have zones of liberation around us as well, if only we choose to. So any one of those actions would be remarkable on its own. But if you do them all. And if enough of us do them all, then we will be living out a radical vision of society that is built on love and built on joining, that is so purely good that it deserves to be at the very center of what it means for us to be on a spiritual journey. And that's the point that I want to close on. Because if we are going to put our faith and our trust in something, especially something that has the audacity to call itself God's vision for our lives, then it should be worthy of that trust by being purely good. And purely good means purely good for everyone without exception, not purely good for a few people and not so good for others. The mark of spiritual truth is when it is purely good for all without exception. It hurts my heart whenever I hear about spiritual practices that divide. It hurts my heart whenever I hear that the Course doesn't have anything it wants us to do in the world. Can you honestly listen to any of the passages that I have just read to you today and think that there's any division here, or think that the Course is saying that there's nothing for us to do? There is so much for us to do. And in fact, there's so much for us to do, it might even feel overwhelming. And so if you're thinking, what can one person truly accomplish? I'll remind you that Thomas Merton famously said, monks must be as trees which exist silently in the dark and by their vital presence purify the air. I love that so much. We don't often think of monks as these powerful forces of social change, but Merton's point is that by being like a tree that purifies the air with prayer and spiritual presence, they fill a vital role. Merton didn't know about the Course. He wasn't around, or he was around before the Course was published. But it's interesting to me that he chose the image of a tree, given how much we've been talking here about the Course's imagery of gardens. What trees do is, and this was Merton's point, trees absorb toxins in the air, and trees release oxygen so that we can all breathe here. And that's what the Course is asking us to do as well. It's asking us to be the vital presence of love that purifies the air of this world, and to be the vital presence through which God Himself can regreen our world. Thank you.